For a while now, the Brexit picture has focused on the demands of the UK. Throughout the leadership contest that eventually elected Boris Johnson, there was a lot of talk of the different paths the UK could take going forward, like the idea of renegotiating the withdrawal agreement in order to remove the backstop, or withholding the divorce payment the UK owes the EU, or just leaving without a deal at all. While at the same time, there hasn't been very much talk about the other side, what the EU 27 want from Brexit. So in this video, we're going to look outwards and discuss what the other 27 countries in the EU want from Brexit. We're also going to talk about the EU's negotiating tactics and the way that the next few months are likely to play out. Before we do though, I want to ask a very quick favour from you. Normally we ask you guys to sign up to our Patreon or to buy merch, but this time it's super simple. Please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Getting subscribers obviously helps us reach more people, but it also improves our credibility when we're trying to reach out to experts and potential interviewees. Also, as a little incentive, once we reach 300,000 subscribers, we have 3 major announcements about TLDR that we'll share. So hit the subscribe button to help us get one step closer. Also, if you're already subscribed, consider hitting the bell icon to get notified when we release a video. Anyway, let's get into the video. The fact that we've heard so little about what these other 27 countries want is in part due to the way that the EU has established these negotiations. Rather than attempt to let each EU 27 country negotiate with the Prime Minister and their UK delegation, the EU 27 agreed to make the EU Commission their official arbitrator. This does make sense, even from a purely practical perspective. The whole negotiating process didn't exactly look fun for May and her team. So, if they had to negotiate with all 27 EU countries individually, this would become a whole lot more miserable. But it's more than just narrowing down the number of people who need to be involved in negotiations. That's because for the EU 27, Brexit isn't necessarily about advancing individual national interests, but instead it's about protecting common ones. Dr. Nikolai von Ondarza of the German Institute for International and Security Affairs commented on the EU's approach, saying that from a European point of view, Brexit is an exercise in damage control. There's no variation of Brexit that can benefit either the UK or the EU 27. Viewed from Berlin, Brussels or Paris, the worst possible outcome is not a no-deal Brexit, but the unravelling of the single market. The European single market is fundamental to the European Union, and an aspect that the EU has never been comfortable undermining. A no-deal Brexit would objectively hurt the European Union, but a Brexit that undermined the sanctity of the single market and its freedoms would hurt a whole lot more. Because of that, member states don't necessarily want anything from Brexit. They just want it done without undermining the single market. Or so it seems. So besides this, what are the EU saying with their one united voice? Well, they pretty roundly rejected Johnson's plan for progressing with Brexit. This is something we discussed on a recent video, but Johnson's approach to reopening negotiations on the withdrawal agreement has not proved popular. Beyond the fact that the EU don't like a number of the changes he's proposing, they simply don't accept the idea of reopening negotiations. The EU are happy with the deal they reached with May, so as far as they're concerned, it's their final offer. In fact, when European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker spoke to Boris Johnson last week, he apparently told him that the existing withdrawal agreement was the best and only agreement possible. Even if Johnson could persuade the EU to negotiate a new deal, most agree that another extension would be needed to the deadline, something which Johnson isn't in favour of. But with 94 days left, there simply isn't enough time according to many experts. When it comes to negotiating an extension, Article 50 of the Treaty on the European Union explicitly states that a country will leave the EU 2 years after the notification unless the European Council, in agreement with the member state concerned, unanimously decides to extend the period. The idea of the unanimous decision was vital a couple of months ago when the last extension was negotiated. That's because there were rumours circulating that French President Emmanuel Macron would block any extension requests from the UK, or impose certain conditions for an extension, or require an explicit reason for the extension, such as a change in policy or a second referendum. Macron didn't block the extension that time round, but it does seem that France are considering doing so in the future. To say that the EU works as one on everything and that self-interests are not at play would vastly underestimate the EU and its members, and would amount to downright naivety. Obviously, not every country wants the same thing, despite the unified front that the EU might like to present. In terms of individual member states and Brexit, there are three major players: France, Germany, and Ireland. The EU is an institution that's heavily based on a Franco-German axis and relationship. In general, a decision taken by France and Germany is a decision taken by the entirety of the EU27, be it the formation of a single currency to the development of new budgets. Because of the power these two have, if a policy lacks the backing of either country, it doesn't stay a policy for much longer. As we discussed, Macron is focused on the future of the EU without the UK, and wishes that the process would conclude quickly, in order to prevent the UK's departure delaying or otherwise undermining the other important decisions the EU has to make. Brexit has taken over a lot of discussions in the EU, with a huge number of meetings, conferences and summits being dedicated to the topic. Macron is growing increasingly worried that other EU issues are being overlooked, because Brexit is always the focus. The EU does have a lot going on at the moment. It has new leaders, it has to approve the multi-annual financial framework, and Brexit, to many, has become a distraction from business as usual. That being said, Macron's position does also nicely play into his hands at home, given that Macron's approval ratings in France have deteriorated significantly since the last election. Playing hard with the UK is, in one way or another, going to affect the way that the French electorate see him, and being a strong man works on both sides of the card. On one hand, his determination to protect the single market is likely to help his cause with pro-EU supporters, while his preparedness to put his foot down also managed to place him in a good position with Eurosceptics, showing that he isn't afraid to do the hard thing. Germany's position is slightly more nuanced. According to Jeremy Hunt, former Foreign Secretary, Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, is prepared to renegotiate, or at least will look at any proposals made by the new UK Prime Minister, because she wants to solve this problem. Although, this wouldn't be the first time that the British Prime Minister, or someone vying for that position, believe that Merkel will get them out of a rut. And if it goes anything like last time, nothing will actually come out of it, especially when Merkel is set to leave the Chancellorship soon. This in part highlights the differences between Macron and Merkel. Merkel isn't seeking re-election. She doesn't need to play in the hands of the German electorate, meaning she can be her true self instead. Taking a more generalist approach, Germany as a whole doesn't seem to have any special needs, which means that Germany more or less reflects the opinion of most of the other EU members. So from their perspective, as long as kicking the can down the road doesn't damage the road, then keep kicking. Ireland is another major player, given the delicate topic of the Irish border. Even disregarding economic concerns, the border means that Ireland has the most to lose, with major questions about the stability of peace at the Irish-Northern Irish border. That being said, even Ireland has adopted a similar approach to the other EU countries, with the Irish Prime Minister saying, "There's very much a strong view across the EU that there shouldn't be any more extensions." While I have endless patience, some of my colleagues have lost patience quite frankly with the UK, and there's enormous hostility to any further extension. Any further moves made by Boris Johnson will rest on Ireland. If Ireland isn't on board, then the rest of the EU27 will be cautious to do anything that looks like they're throwing Ireland under the bus. And there arises a catch-22 sort of situation. Brexit cannot be resolved peacefully without some sort of arrangement on the Northern Irish border. The Northern Irish border cannot be resolved peacefully without the consent of the Irish. The Irish won't consent unless it's in their best interest to do so. But if Irish stubbornness forces a no deal, it will ultimately be them who end up paying. Their resolve, their determination to resist a hard border, could be the very thing that ends up causing it. We're interested in diving into this topic even further in the future, so we want to know what you think, especially if you're from an EU27 country. What do you think the attitude to Brexit is in your country? Do people actually care about Brexit? How do your leaders talk about Brexit, if they even do? Let us know in the comments, and make sure to use the hashtag EU27opinions in your comments. I know hashtags don't really work on YouTube, but we'll use the hashtag to search for your comments, so using it will mean it will be easier for us to find you. One other tip, keep your comments relatively concise. There's going to be tons of them to read through, so we want to make sure we can get to as many as we can. Also, as we said at the beginning of this video, we'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel. The amount we've been able to grow in recent months has been incredible, and we really appreciate the opportunity you give us to reach more people, and hopefully make news simpler and more democratic. If you want to lend us a hand, then make sure to subscribe to the channel. And as I said at the top of the video, hitting the bell icon will mean that you get notifications every time we post a video. Also, you can follow us across other social networks simply by searching for TLDR News. And if you want to see your name at the end of the video, just like these people, then make sure to sign up to our Patreon page. There's a link to that down in the description.